At first you might be thinking, is this a story about a war that occurred over land or an area in which chimpanzees lived, or maybe even a dispute between activists protecting the land and people wanting to use it? Well, that is not what this story is about. It is more complicated than that. In recent years, researchers have learnt a lot about these incredible creatures. One thing that has come to light is that chimps will actively hunt down their enemies. After taking their lives, researchers were shocked to learn that the chimps will even eat their enemy. One such story was told by researchers who were following a group of rivals. They noted that one family purposefully staged an attack on the nearby enemies. Once they were finished with the attack, the group carried a baby chimpanzee back to their territory and went on to eat it for a meal. So today, here at Unexplained Mysteries, we'll be taking a look at a community of chimps and their behaviour at the Gombe Chimpanzees War. So, what is or was the Gombe Chimpanzee War? First off, we should discuss what the war actually was. Between January the 7th, 1974 and June 5th, 1978, two groups of chimpanzees in the Gombe Stream National Park waged a terrifying and violent war on each other. The two groups of chimpanzees were once part of one unified group, until 6 adult male chimpanzees, along with 3 adult female chimpanzees and their young, branched off from the original group, and formed a new chimpanzee community separate from the original. The original group, known as the Kamaha community, was now left with just 19 adult chimpanzees in total, 7 males and 12 females, along with their young. It is important to note before getting into the conflict that there were only minor signs of the chimpanzees' aggressive behaviour in relation to the territory before this 4-year-long war began. There were disputes over food and where chimpanzees would eat, but there was nothing to prepare the researchers for what would happen over those 4 years. The beginning of the war. On January 7th, 1974, at the Gombe Stream National Park in Tanzania, the Gombe Chimpanzee War began with the first casualty. The group that initially splintered off from the original community were known as the Kasakela community, led by the 6 adult males, Humphrey, Jomeo, Fegan, Everard, Rodolphe, and Sherry, but was commanded by Fegan, the alpha male, who drew first blood. Godi, one of the adult males that stayed with the original group, was feeding alone on a tree when all 6 of the aforementioned adult males pounced, brutally taking out Godi. When this attack happened, this was the first time any of the chimpanzees had purposely taken out another fellow male. After celebrating their victory, the 6 males went on to kill Hugh, who led the original group along with Charlie and Dee, 2 of the other male chimpanzees. After the ambush, with just 4 remaining adult males in the original Kamaha community, Goliath, an elderly chimpanzee who had tried to be kind to the Kasakela community in previous encounters that did not involve bloodshed, was then killed when the Kasakela group did not share the same kindness. Now, the Kamaha community had just lost over half its adult males, with just 3 now remaining. Charlie, now the sole leader, Sniff, and Willy Wally. Unfortunately, Willy Wally had been crippled from polio, so he was unable to defend himself or his community. In rapid succession, without giving the Kamaha group any time to fight back or plan their own attack, the Kasakela chimpanzees hit again, this time killing the leader Charlie. Once Charlie was taken out, Willy Wally disappeared and was never found, whereas Sniff, the youngest male, managed to survive by himself for over a year. Researchers had thought that Sniff would be able to be accepted into the Kasakela community, or that he had managed to escape the war into a new group, but this was not the case. Around a year after Charlie was killed, Sniff too was also killed by the Kasakela males. The adult males were not the only casualties of the Kasakela's attacks. Of the initial Kamaha group's females, 2 of them went missing and were never found. 3 of them had been kidnapped into the Kasakela community and 1 was killed. The Kasakela males had managed to take out almost all of the Kamaha males, with Willy Wally's fate unknown. They had also successfully taken over the Kamaha territory and had won the war, or so it seemed. Battles were won, but wars were lost. The new territory that the Kasakela community had gained would not be theirs for long. The previous Kamaha territory was direct neighbours with another chimpanzee community, the Kalandi. The Kalandi community greatly outnumbered the Kasakela community and were far superior in general strength. The new border between the two communities was now the location for violent outbursts between the males, and very quickly, the Kasakela group decided to move back towards their original territory. And in the process, the Kalande community took much of the Kasakela's newly acquired territory. After moving back, the Kasakela community were then constantly in minor skirmishes with Matumba foragers. The Matumba foragers had larger numbers compared to Kasakela, and as a result, over time the war died down and eventually a common order was restored at Gombe National Park. Aftermath and reaction. Jane Goodall was a lead researcher at the time of the war, and she spent 30 years studying the chimpanzees of the Gombe National Park. When the war broke out, it was not expected at the time. No one ever thought something like this could or would happen, especially Jane Goodall. Jane was shocked and disturbed at the whole thing, and had spent her time researching up until that point with the notion that chimpanzees were rather nice when comparing them to humans. The events that occurred and the Gombe chimpanzee war itself was so unheard of at the time that when Jane Goodall was reporting on the events that were happening in Gombe National Park, other researchers did not believe her. A naturally occurring war between chimpanzees was never believed to be a thing that could happen, yet it did. Jane was then accused of inadvertently causing the war through her feeding research, and some scientists at the time were completely adamant that this could not happen. It was not possible. Almost 50 years later, in 2018, there was a study that was published looking into the Gombe chimpanzee war, and the study had concluded that the war was probably caused by the power struggle between the three top chimpanzees, Hugh, Charlie, and Fegan, which was then made worse by the exceptionally low number of fertile female chimpanzees in the community. And that concludes the story of the Gombe chimpanzee war. Scientists discover Zealandia. You would think it unlikely that there would be a hidden continent, but it just so happens that is exactly what scientists exploring the South Pacific have uncovered. In the 1990s, a team of 32 scientists from over 12 different countries found Zealandia in all its glory. Zealandia lies beneath the surface of the murky seas, thought to have been submerged over 80 million years ago. This secret continent is partially raised up on the ocean bed and appears to be roughly 2/3 the size and length of Australia, or about the size of India. Zealandia is located midway between New Caledonia and New Zealand, from which it gets its name. Several scientists have come out since its initial discovery with the argument that it ought to be officially recognised as one of Earth's continents. A more recent examination done by the team of scientists who discovered it in the first place back in the 1990s reveals that the continent was on the ocean's surface more recently than originally thought. The IODP, short for International Ocean Discovery Program, and the A&M University of Texas teamed up in their investigations of the submerged continent and found that its land levels made it possible for plant life and animals to cross between continents. Formerly, it was believed that Zealandia sunk incredibly deep, and that was why it took us so long to find out about its very existence. However, new evidence attests it is not as lowly immersed as we believed, though it is still at least over a kilometre or 2/3 of a mile below surface level, making it extremely challenging to investigate properly, and thus surveys of it have been scarce. As recently as 2017, researchers managed to go on an expedition with sufficient equipment, drilling into Zealandia's seabed at 6 different sites. The water depths drilled more than 1,250 metres, or 4,000 feet deep. The expedition was fruitful, with 8,000 feet worth of sediment getting collected for analysis. These samples, when analysed, can reveal a plethora of valuable information: volcanism, climate, when the region had its time above the surface, how the land changed through the millennia. Countless wonderful results could be found out. Gerald Dickens, the co-chief scientist at the Texan Rice University in Houston, explained that alongside sediment samples, they found many fossils. He commented upon the matter. More than 8,000 specimens were studied, and several hundred fossil species were identified. Once the analyses returned from the sediments and fossil samples, it was revealed that the environment of Zealandia was shockingly unconventional to what researchers expected. The spores and pollen taken from land plants and shells of various shallow sea organisms showed that the Ring of Fire, a circular formation in the Pacific Ocean where volcanic eruptions and earthquakes are a constant threat, had much to do with the continent's doomed sinkage. The Ring of Fire, over millions of years, caused drastic changes in the ocean's depth, which led to it overwhelming the poor continent and eventually consuming it. Rupert Sutherland, an expedition scientist at Victoria University of Wellington in New Zealand, has stated that those working on the project believe Zealandia sank beneath the waves after its separation from both Australia and Antarctica back when the continents were still forming. This grand discovery can help give us much-needed insight into what life was like in the South Pacific millions of years ago, particularly how plants and animals evolved, and furthermore can assist us in understanding the way our tectonic plates move. Perhaps scientists may even be able to use Zealandia to produce accurate simulations of how the Earth's climate changes through the coming years. Mountain madness found to be a real psychosis. Imagine you are a lone mountaineer and suddenly you hear a voice and someone begins to follow you. This is far from abnormal and is in fact a terrifying reality for many climbers. Although hallucinations have always been common with high altitudes, the phenomenon was initially thought to be a form of altitude sickness. These climbing-based psychotic episodes, known as mountain madness, are now considered to be a very real form of psychosis. It is extremely common for climbers to lose touch with reality, seeing movement where there is none and hearing human voices and music in silence. These visual and auditory symptoms are prevalent for mountaineers at high altitudes. The other phenomenon that these people often experience is a somacetic illusion called the third man factor, where they believe they are climbing with someone else. The study of this phenomenon is continuing by emergency medicine doctors from URAC Research and the Medical University of Innsbruck. Findings have confirmed that the symptoms are unrelated to typical ailments that come from high altitudes but are entirely psychotic. This mountain madness is now formally known as isolated high-altitude psychosis. In reaching this conclusion, researchers analysed 83 psychotic episodes found in German mountaineer literature. The first-hand findings of one of the researchers when climbing Everest also contributed to the findings. When Dr. Jeremy Windsor climbed Everest in 2008, at an altitude of over 5.1 miles, Dr. Windsor was met by a man named Jimmy. Jimmy climbed side by side with Dr. Windsor, providing words of encouragement and support. The two spoke all day while they continued their climb when suddenly Jimmy vanished without a trace. It is now known that Dr. Windsor hallucinated Jimmy as a symptom of isolated high-altitude psychosis. Most often, these symptoms start to appear when climbers reach over 23,000 feet above sea level. The only cure for these symptoms is to descend the mountain. There have been no lasting effects of this form of psychosis, and people return to their normal state immediately once they reach a lower altitude. Scientists suspect that this psychosis is due to reduced oxygen levels in the brain, stress, isolation, or a combination of these, but unfortunately, the cause behind these symptoms remains unconfirmed. There is no evidence of the frequency of these symptoms, or if certain people are more susceptible to isolated high-altitude psychosis than others. Researchers hope to uncover more about this mountain madness because of the dangerous nature of hallucinations and psychosis while navigating treacherous terrains. Darwaza Gas Crater. In Turkmenistan, also known as Turkmenia, a gas crater has been on fire since the 70s. This sovereign country is east of the Caspian Sea and is one of the most sparsely populated countries in Asia, with only 6 million inhabitants. Its cities were some of the most important stops along the Silk Road and are considered the oldest oasis cities in Central Asia. It has the fourth largest natural gas reserve, which actually contributed to the Darwaza Gas Crater. In 1971, Soviet geologists and engineers set up drilling rigs in the middle of the Karakum Desert. They believed the location was a profitable oil field, but instead found a natural gas pocket underneath the drill site. Soon after they conducted their initial assessment, the ground collapsed, burying the rigging equipment and creating a large crater. Fortunately, no one was harmed during this accident. The crater covers 5,350 square meters, reaches a depth of 30 meters, and features continuously burning hotspots and orange flames. The fire and its longevity led the villagers of Darwaza to refer to it as the door to hell or the gates of hell. Once the ground collapsed, the Soviet researchers feared that the crater would spread dangerous methane gas and reach neighboring villages and towns. They decided to set the gas on fire to burn it all up, estimating that it would burn for only a few weeks and then die out. It has now been 50 years, and scientists believe it will continue burning for much longer. The natural gas comes from a large gas pocket deep within the surface, which allows for a slow accumulation of fuel and protects the gas flow from the wind. The Turkmenistan government has been indecisive over its opinion on the crater. In 2010, the president ordered that the crater be closed to reduce its influence on the other natural gas fields nearby. The country wanted to increase its production and export of natural gas, so they feared the crater would impede their potential revenue. Then, in 2013, the president declared it a protected nature reserve. It seems the government now plans to use it as an attraction to promote tourism. Regardless, the crater will continue to burn and entice visitors to come and see the gates of hell. But what do you make of these discoveries that have been unearthed? Be sure to let us know your thoughts in the comments section below and help us by growing this community while working to solve these unexplained mysteries. Thank you for watching, and don't forget to subscribe for more videos.